Welcome to Skweeel, episode 5. I'm here at SA Byron Bay's beautiful SSL 9000K studio, which they're letting me use for the duration of the project, and I can never thank them enough. What we're doing in this episode is exploring the recall system. On a console such as this one, which has an automation computer, the recall system allows you to store the position of every single pot, switch and fader on every module, as well as a few aspects of the master section. Now I'm curious about how precisely these positions are stored, because I'm even more curious about how precisely I'll be able to recreate those positions so that I can retrieve those beautiful timbres that we've stumbled upon. Let's get going. So while I was thinking about this episode, I thought I could use a well-known recall system trick to investigate how precisely the pots are stored and retrieved. So the trick is, whenever you're working with stereo elements, say you had two microphones on a piano coming down modules 23 and 24, and let's say you wanted to apply exactly the same processing, EQ for instance, on both sides, left channel, right channel. The usual way you would do this is you would mimic the positions of the pots so that they're as similar as possible on both sides. So let's do this, but instead of having a piano, let's have good old Larsen effects. So you can't see it, but up there I'm pretty much aligning the pot positions for the line input. So in my theoretical example of a stereo piano coming down these two channels, if I wanted to apply a particular EQ in such a way that it's exactly the same on both channels to preserve phase integrity and such, then I would really have to be very precise. So let's mute the channel 24 for now, and let's focus on our theoretical left channel. In fact, I'm going to pan it left, and later on remind me to pan the right channel 24 to the right. So I'm going to dial in the EQ that would be appropriate for my theoretical piano. Just randomly moving pots around. There. So let's say that that is the EQ that you would actually like across both channels of your theoretical piano. So I'm going to unmute channel 24. Thank you for reminding me to pan that to the right. Now, if I do what we would usually do, which is mimic visually the exact same settings, well, we're about to see that there's a big flaw in proceeding that way. It would help if the EQ was switched in, wouldn't it? But actually, I didn't have to listen to prove my point. By simply doing what you would think would work, which is visually mimicking the settings, we should hear exactly the same Larsen effect timbre and pitch, right? So remember, this is an imaginary stereo piano. By proceeding this way, normally I'd get exactly the same sound. We're using Larsen effects instead, which we know are much more sensitive to the slightest little misalignment. Here goes nothing. I'm about to unmute channel 23. This should be exactly the same pitch and timbre if using our eyes precisely replicates the processing that I've applied on that side. Here goes nothing. It's close, close in, it's definitely the same timbre, but it's not the same pitch. So why is this happening? Let's mute this for now. It's happening because on an analog console, a potentiometer is typically just a variable resistor. In other words, depending on which position the pot is set to, the value of the resistance that's hidden below it changes. So let's imagine, I'm making this up, that when this pot is at 9 o'clock, the resistance value is 500 ohm. Let's say that it's 1 kilo ohm, 1000 ohm, when the pot is at noon, 12 o'clock. And let's say that the resistance is 2 kilo ohm when the pot is facing 3 o'clock. Now, you would think that the same pot on the channel next door would also be respectively at 500 ohm, 1 kilo ohm, 2 kilo ohm. Turns out that despite the fact, especially on consoles that are this advanced and this expensive, despite the fact that they use resistors with very little tolerance, still, you would not get, if both pots are facing 9 o'clock, this one might be applying a resistance of 500 ohm, whereas this one might apply a resistance of 480 ohms. When this one's at noon, it might apply 1 kilo ohm, whereas this one might apply 900 ohm. And when this one is in this position, 3 o'clock, and this one is as well, the actual resistance value might not be the same when the visual position is the same. So this is where the recall trick does its magic. Let's demonstrate this now. So how does a recall system work? It works by sending voltages to the various pots and switches on the console and measuring what comes back. So for switches, it's actually quite simple. If the switch is on, then the voltage comes back. If the switch is off, then the voltage doesn't come back. So that gets stored as such. The switch was on, the switch was off. For pots and faders, well, we just saw that they are nothing else but, on an analog console, variable resistors. So if you send a known voltage to a resistor, it will come back altered by the exact value that the resistor has applied. And so instead of storing the physical position of the pot, you've guessed it now, it stores the actual resistance value. And that is more important when it comes to mimicking a particular EQ or dynamics processing that you really want to be the same on another channel. It's more important to store the same resistor values, because then you know that the process is as close as possible on both of your signals, left and right. Here they're radically different. So here's what I've done. I've dialed in a particular EQ on channel 23. And on channel 24, I've set the EQ off and I've reset the EQ pots. The only thing that I've mimicked are the two line input levels up there. And now I'm going to use the recall trick to see how close I can get the resistor values from this channel to the model, which is channel 23. So first I'm going to tell the console, pretty please, can you scan the whole desk and can you store all of the values? There, it's done. See, it only took about 2 seconds. That's how quickly it can do a frame that size. I'm going to keep the default name. There we go. And now what I can do is, again, tell the console, pretty please, it works a lot better if you say, pretty please, can you, let's say, show me what the values you stored for channel 24 are. So the way most recall systems work is if a pot is not exactly in the position that it was, or if a switch is not in the position that it was, then anything that is not aligned to what's in the computer's memory will have a big yellow swab above it. So for switches, there we go, it's a matter of getting rid of the yellow, and for pots, that yellow ring will disappear if the pot is aligned with what's been stored in memory. Right, so I can use the copy function. That's the trick for aligning stereo or multi-channel processes so that they're as identical as possible to one another. Because I can tell the computer, please copy over channel 23 to channel 24. It cleverly remembered the settings from last time I tried. And yes, I would like to copy over just the total recall setup. Do it, there we go. So now if I inspect channel 24, now that I've copied over all the resistance values from channel 23, if I look at channel 24, abracadabra, anything that's in yellow is not the same resistance value as channel 23. So interestingly, right all the way up there, even though I aligned visually the two line inputs, we can see that the value there, and I almost had to turn this 2 or 3 degrees to get the line input to be now the same resistor value as the line input on channel 23. If I keep going with my recall on channel 24, so we see, for instance, that yes, the cut switch, I stored the whole console with channel 23 muted, so it's telling me, well, you need to mute channel 24 if you want it to be the same as channel 23. Well, no thank you. I would like to keep that unmuted. In fact, I'm going to unmute channel 23. Same thing, channel 23 being our hypothetical left channel for our stereo piano. The pan pot was stored full left, and I'm going to keep it pan full right. But this is where we need to focus. The whole idea of the test is if I now use the recall system to dial in the same EQ, resistance-wise, not pot position-wise. Here goes. Every time I reach the same resistor value, the yellow ring around the pot disappears. So theoretically, I should achieve a much closer signal. My Larsen effect should be pretty much the same. All right, let's leave the recall system. And look at that. This is much closer in pitch and timbre than what we had. So there, we have an example of how the recall trick to dial in identical settings has gotten us closer to what visually aligning pots enabled us to get earlier. What I now need to do is do this 10 times, 20 times on random channels, just to see if indeed comparing between the timbres and pitches I am able to align using the visual method, whether I can get more precision using the recall trick that you now know. I'm now doing exactly the same thing using 2 different channels. 19 and 20 are ready to go. On 20, I thought I would bring in the throat-like timbre, which I've done with my EQ, and just to make it a little bit more complex, I'm throwing in just a tad of compression, which alters the timbre. Now, using the traditional method of visually mimicking with my left channel, channel 19, I should be able to get the same timbre, at least, hoping. Will I get the exact same pitch is the question. So if I now compare with channel 20, it's quite close. Now the idea is, can we get closer using the recall system? Now I'm using the recall system to match the two channels. So this is channel 20, the way it was for the previous example, and this is what channel 19 sounds like. I've reset everything on channel 19 apart from the line input gain, which I visually aligned. First step, let's tell the console to quickly scan the whole surface and store all of the positions. So that will store the values for channel 20. If we inspect values for channel 20, indeed, nothing yellow appears, meaning that all the settings for that channel have been stored. If I were to accidentally bump the monitor fader, it would immediately tell me, sorry, it's not in its proper position. So I want exactly these settings copied over to channel 19, which I'm going to do now. Conveniently, it's recalling the same settings as in my previous trial, 20 to 19, that's done. So now if I were to inspect channel 19, I see that several things are not in place, starting with my line input gain, which was visually aligned, but which I need to now align in terms of resistance value. So that's done. I'll start with the EQ because that is the most contributing factor in that sound. So activating it. Sadly, we can't hear anything because as long as recall is active, the sound on the desk is muted. It would probably be quite interesting to actually hear what it does, but sadly there's no such option. There we go. Now activating the dynamic section, positioning the pots, and the last two things which appear as not being the same as 20 is our pan position. That's quite normal. I want channel 20 to be on the far right and channel 19 to be on the far left. And this is something that's always annoyed engineers. Anytime you have a pot that has a center indentation, meaning it's got a physical little bump at the center, whenever you physically have that pot in its little indentation, what will happen is that when you copy that over to another channel, you sometimes have to be just on the border of that bump. It can be quite annoying. Anyway, so now let's unmute our channels. For that, I have to exit the recall. This is channel 20, and this is channel 19. not exactly the same, but definitely closer than what we were able to achieve using the visual approach. And that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave your feedback on the Facebook page for the project or its YouTube channel. I'm really interested to know what you think about all this. If you want to try this at home, again, a word of caution, protect your hearing. Feedback loops, Larsen effects can really take you by surprise, and they can be quite loud. On these wise words, till next time, ciao.